Hi there, this is Stephanie Pache, editor and publisher of RCR News Media, and the host of the podcast In the Room With. Today, we have the pleasure of being in the room with filmmaker Paul Ingles, who's here in Albuquerque talking to me over Zoom. Welcome, Paul. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you and the viewers. Stephanie, great. Thanks for being interested.
So Paul has made a few films, and he's going to talk to us about one specifically that's very near and dear to his heart. It's called Soldier's Passage. And not only does he have a wonderful, heart-touching film, but he also is doing something amazing to help local here in Albuquerque, and that's donating part of the proceeds from his film, rental or purchase online, to the Guild Theater here in Albuquerque to help them because of being shut down for COVID. So first of all, Paul, that struck us as the most important thing we saw on the internet in a while, that generosity and that kindness of you to support local, but also mostly because this story is incredibly personal to you. And if you could just give us a little background on you and then tell us a little bit more about your journey with this film, what your inspiration was, and
Sure.
let us know more about that. Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Well, I'm a radio guy. I've been in radio for 46 years since I went to Wake Forest University. I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C., but went to school in the South. And at the Wake Forest University, even though I was an English major and kind of leaning toward journalism or maybe photojournalism, I really got enamored with the university radio station. And they let students do everything there. I mean, record shows and sports broadcasts and news broadcasts and things like that. So that was my fraternity in college, was joining the radio station. And naturally, then when I graduated, I started looking for work, and I became a news reporter in Charlotte, North Carolina, a news and sports reporter, kind of phased out of the news and sports reporting later in my career to do more music programming, disc jockey, program director work. And I guess I was in commercial radio for about 16 years. Landed in Albuquerque twice, actually, but we'll say the early 90s for this last stint, and switched over to public radio, started working at the University of New Mexico's public radio station. Worked there for 8 years, and then wanted to find out if I could survive as a freelance reporter and radio producer working in my home. Actually, the reason that became possible was that in the mid-90s, computer editing became possible for audio and for film as well. And it changed what you needed to be able to create the media, create the art.
Mm-hmm.
So when it went on to desktops and then laptops, I could do it at home. And so I thought, let me try it. And I started reporting for NPR and for other public radio shows, and was managed to survive. I had to get some consulting contracts. It was kind of a tough road, but it's close to 20 years now of doing freelance work. And so the radio sustained me for a long time and continues to. Actually, I still do radio work. But I'd say about 10 years ago, I got an offer from a friend at Christmas for either guitar lessons or acting lessons. And since I had tried guitar lessons many times, and although I love music and most of the radio work I do is about music history, it just didn't take. So I said, let's try acting this time, because I've just always loved film. I'm one of those guys that when you watch films, you kind of imagine, could you pull that off? Could you act as well and or at all, on screen? So I took acting classes at Soul Acting Academy, which is still an entity here in Albuquerque. 10 years ago, it was owned by John and Vivian Nesbitt, John Dillon and Vivian Nesbitt. And just took some classes, met some wonderful people, about 5 years of fairly consistent class work and scene work. And then when I graduated myself. It's not like I'd learned everything there was to learn, but I thought, okay, just like a lot of the colleagues that I was in class with, they were wanting to get small parts in movies and do background work, and film was really gearing up in New
Mhm.
Mexico. In my late 50s, as I was then, it wasn't the path that I could imagine. I didn't have the patience for, doing a lot of auditions and standing in line and trying to get on the set. I wasn't as enamored with that um, fantasy as I was just saying, okay, now could I make a movie of my own and write my own script? And my mom had passed away, an aunt had passed away, left me a little disposable income. So that's what I started to do. And I teamed up with my friend Tim Nenninger, who was actually shooting scenes for the Soul Acting Academy. The actors would write their own scenes or they'd recreate scenes from movies. And he was doing some really basic but good looking scene work, one
Mm.
camera, 3 shots, 2 shot, over the shoulder, over the shoulder. So I thought, well, maybe if I could come up with a script that would be something like that. And so I came up with a script for a short movie, and I'll kind of shortcut it from here. Then I came up with a script for a feature movie. And now I've just finished a documentary. And this was sort of the trilogy of things that I'd had ideas about that I really wanted to do. All stories based on my experience of we'll call it middle-aged uh, man, going through relationships and then dealing with the passing of my father. And the documentary actually is about um, a bunch of guys that I play basketball with at the University of New Mexico on a regular basis. And they've been playing together for 40 years. I've only been playing together with them for 15 years.
Okay.
But it's kind of a remarkable story that we could talk about later if there's time. But that's the arc, I would say. So I've made a short, a feature, and a documentary, and I'm kind of done for now because it's an expensive hobby. Um,
Right.
I mean, I'm sure you have questions, but trying to be able to actually compensate people to get them to work on a film, I could count on friends to donate uh, their services for small um, a day's work or something. But if you're going to have people there every day helping you, and then these are high skill positions.
Right.
So I would say I spent about 10 grand on each of the 3 films, give or take a grand or two.
Mhm.
And but I'm pleased with what we've done.
Great. So we're going to talk a little bit, go into more depth about A Soldier's Passage. Um, and the whole title is what? A Soldier's Passage, Conversations from the Last Mile of the Long Walk Home. So that's a very, not only a long title, but if you think about, there's so many ways that that can go, but because this is so personal, tell us the inspiration and how why you made this film and why it's important.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I wanted to, I don't know if the Conversations from the Last Mile of the Long Walk Home is actually a title as much as it is what do they call it, the tagline for the
Log
film,
line, yeah.
the log
Mhm.
line, right? I wanted the conversations to be put in there because that's mostly what it is. Um, I would say stylistically, the inspiration came from My Dinner with Andree, which is the cult classic uh, that many of your viewers will know. Basically, two guys sitting in a restaurant talking about life and acting, and Wallace Shawn, and I always forget the name of the other actor who's pretty famous in stage and theater. Uh,
Andre Gregory.
Andre Gregory. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I can be completely entertained for 90 minutes by watching two people talk over dinner.
Mhm.
I'm sure not everybody can be, but as I was spending time with my dad in the last 9 months of his life, he's a World War II veteran, was closing in on 93 years old. My mom had passed away 5 years ago. He was living alone in a retirement home in North Carolina. Because my brother and sister both teach and I'm a freelancer, it was easier for me to spend time with him.
Mhm.
So I cut out this time, and it was a profound experience for me to have these conversations with anyone, but much less my dad, who was going through the final stages of life. And so I had just finished the short film, which is also a long title, but it's The Weeds in Our Own Backyards, which had a little vignette of my father's story in it, played by the same actor who we got for A Soldier's Passage, Fred Schwab, who's a local theater actor. But in 2015, when I wrapped up that film, it was the beginning of my dad's last year. And so I was still thinking about what to do next. And then as I was right in the middle of having these heart-to-heart conversations with him and heart-to-heart conversations with my therapist in Albuquerque to help me process this. And, I think therapy has been a key part of me enjoying and handling life for probably 20 years. And I highly recommend it. I decided to make that part of the story.
Mhm.
And so there are these parallel stories of me talking with a therapist, me talking with my dad, um, coming back to the therapist saying, this is what happened. This is where we're at. He's talking about this now and he's going through a life review. How can I be more help? And so, I thought that mostly it could be a series of conversations. And that's mostly what it is, I would
Mhm.
say. And I think that um, viewers going into it, there's a lot more we could say about it, and I hope we will, but should know that. So that's why I wanted to put conversations in that line.
Right. It is important for us to also destigmatize getting therapy. You need someone to talk to, whether it is a professional, it is a friend, it is, whomever, your clergy. We aren't built to have to just contain all emotion and never share. So it is important to have that. And to be able to have someone be there just as a sounding board, so what it is that that emotion that you're feeling, and how you can embrace it, because it could also, and a lot of people, in my experience, ignore. They don't want to face the reality, right? They don't want to accept that their family member is at that stage of life, or this is happening in their life, and then that further burdens them. So having the conversation not only with your father but also with a therapist, so when you go back you're refreshed and that burden is lifted, and it's easier for you to continue with your father without having him feel you being crushed by some of that emotion. Would you say that I'm on the right track with that?
Oh yeah, no, 100%. I love to hear you talk about it because it's refreshing to hear somebody else talk about it but me when I try to pitch this. And it really was a purpose of the film. Um, and the thing about, you mentioned all the different options, right? You said a friend or a pastor or a therapist. The thing about the therapist is that generally when you enter a relationship with a behavioral psychologist or a therapist, a counselor, you have a appointment every
Mhm,
week, every 2 weeks. You can set it for whatever you need, and it really is like a tune-up. It's an emotional tune-up. It's a mental workout,
mhm,
um, and above all else, ideally, it's the safe, safe place.
right.
You don't, it's not complicated. You can't make your partner a therapist. You can't make really your best friend a therapist. You can't make, um, your parents a therapist. You can use their counsel, of course, particularly
Mhm,
if you trust them. But the idea for the therapy is obviously to make it that safe, secret place
mhm,
where you can totally be yourself.
mhm,
Count on the person is there, trained to listen to you.
mhm,
There's a scene early in the film where I'm finishing up a session with Don, is the therapist's name, played brilliantly, by the way, by Greg Nye, modeled after the therapist that I've had for 15 years or so now. And
Mhm.
Greg just nailed it. He's never met him. Obviously, I don't make that person's name public,
Right.
but he was just perfect. I saw him at a workshop at Soul Acting Academy, because after I stopped taking classes, I'd still drop in and watch their showcases.
Mhm.
And I picked several actors for this film from a showcase. But anyway, so the character, and this is all written basically as it happened. I mean, it's a transcription of my story to a large degree.
Sure.
So I'm getting up to leave, and he says, when you're with him, see if he has anything to say about all these things that you've talked about with me about him. And I say, well, what do you mean? That he made my mom cry and blamed our kids, but blamed his kids, or he thought my politics was naive and ill-conceived, and didn't listen to me the way you do. And he said, yeah, that kind of stuff. And I said, I don't want to, he's 93, Don. I don't want to, drag him through all that. He's, earned some peace from all of my hangups. And he says, no, just listen. Just listen. He may have something to say about all this in these end of life times. And I said, okay, so it's not like me bringing it up. He's just telling me, be aware
Mhm.
that if he's doing a life review, he might go through this. And as the film points out, yeah, it really did happen, is that my dad was going through a very active life review. And we would sit, the poster is behind me here, but people will see it if they go to the Vimeo page for the film. Um, we would sit out in the courtyard at the retirement home, and I wouldn't have to say anything. I would just, I might say, what's up, Dad, because I could see he was like contemplating, and he'd say, well, I'm just thinking how I could have been kinder to your mom, you
Mm.
know, and that would just open up a conversation about, well, what do you mean? And he would say, well, I didn't pay her as much attention as I could have. I got around to it too late, and gave me the chance to say, well, it's just good that you got to it at all, and she found her happiness. She, had friends, and we're all only partially responsible for the happiness of the people that we're partnered with. So that's a little. I just did the clip, right? So it's just a little taste of and these are the conversations that, and they move through stages of his health, obviously, because at certain points, and this is why I think the film is so valuable and has been for everybody who's seen it, that is kind of in our age bracket or just dealing with parents getting older.
Mhm.
They either before they saw it or right after they saw it, they'd say, this is happening in my family right now.
Mhm.
And it's so comforting to be able to just hear somebody else's experience with this and get a few ideas
Right.
about how to navigate through it. And then, of course, later we can talk in a moment if you want to, but the questions of the stages of care
Right.
for someone who's that age are
Mhm.
always kind of controversial inside a family.
Mhm. For me, just from my experience in my family, as you say, every family is going through this. When I was younger, my great grandmother, who was died at 98, so she had a good life, and her mother died at 101. Believe it or not,
Good
crazy.
genes.
Good
Good
genes.
genes.
Does that mean I'm only halfway through?
I hope
but
so.
but anyway, visiting her as a teenager, I visited her, and they had her in a home, and she had, she was didn't remember who anyone was, and I remember thinking, remembering her as a vibrant, crazy great grandma that I just adored. And just to go and be with her and smile and make her feel not threatened, because at that point she didn't know who I was. And so trying to understand walking in this situation and how you manage that, right? And then I look at my family, who all they did was cry and weep, and she doesn't remember me and all of that, and I'm thinking, but she had a beautiful life. Let's rejoice her life. Let's not bring that emotion to her. And I'm 15 years old, and that was
Mm.
my take on it and viewing them, So every family has different things. I've gone to even estate sales and you're observing the family crisis over who's getting what items that are still for sale, on a table somewhere. There's so much emotion at that point where everybody's trying to, um, I think, do the right thing in their mind to take care of that person. Um, and your film is, and my father was also a veteran, and so I kind of, I was reading the description of your film. I'm like, this is so close to home for me in so many ways because of who your father was. You saw him as this warrior, right? The veteran, and he's seen so much, and you know his life going through all of those things. And then on the opposite side, you're trying to support him and understand all of those things. And you're not a medical professional. You're just, you're also seeking this information on how you can be supportive and understand where he is, what those stages are, as you pointed out, because they do change and sometimes pretty dramatically from one moment to the next. Right. So, and that kind of slaps you into the reality of, oh my gosh, she doesn't know who I am. Or
Yeah.
today
Mhm.
he's talking about this. So tell us a little bit more about some of those, things that you learned as you were making this film and caring for your father.
Well, it's a lot. I mean, and as I wrote the script in January and February of 2017, uh, well, the first cut of this film is 3 hours and 15 minutes long. And I was going to stick with it at that, and we were going to make it episodic and make it, web episodes. So there, even in the final cut, there's still 6 chapters to it. So we had that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
But I really thought that was asking too much for an unknown independent film, with no famous actors in it, for people to find it and say, okay, yeah, I'll sign up for 6 chapters of that.
Sure.
So there was a lot anyway, and then there's a lot that I had to cut out to make it. I mean, it's 2 hours and 20 minutes as it is now. So most people would, consider that kind of a long ride too. But that's the best I could do.
Mm-hmm.
So, but in that cutting, obviously, as in every film editor's work, you take it through stages of crystallization where you really are having to ask those tough questions about how essential is this? Is this peripheral? Is this something that's more about mood, or what is each possibility about? And then you say, well, that can go, that can be in the director's cut. I can watch anytime I want.
Right, right.
So um, so there's a lot, but to spin off of a couple things that you were saying, one is that we were very lucky that my dad did not go through steps of dementia or Alzheimer's. So up until the time that he was unresponsive for a period before he passed, um, we could talk to him, and not that he wasn't, you know, losing his place sometimes. That's depicted in the film. He was so self-sufficient right to a year before uh, this chapter was told, so that you know the, and these are handled in the conversations, is that he prided himself on being dependable and being
Mm-hmm.
self-sufficient. So for him to lose the ability to take care of himself was a first big step.
Mm-hmm.
And it became very clear that after a fainting spell that he returned, and he was quite weakened by spending time in the hospital, that when he came back, he needed home health assistance,
Right.
but he didn't understand that and didn't want that, and could say, I can still get to the bathroom with my walker. I should still be able to go down for meals. And, everybody else around him was saying, Dad, no, not really, but you have to handle that gently. And
Mm-hmm.
at some point, and this is depicted in the film too, is that there's a moment that actually happened where, I'm with him, and I was trying to let him still dress himself for bed, put his pajamas on, and he was trying to do it, but there was something about the ordering capability of his mind that he couldn't finish the job. You know, he'd get to the point where he'd button his shirt, his pants were still down, and he said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Mm.
And, you know, so that scene was very dramatic in my life when I said, let me help you. And I pulled his pajama bottoms up and he just collapsed and said, he was in tears. He said, I can't believe it's come to this, you know. And, you know, I at that moment, I took that moment to say, you know, look, uh, he says, I'm of no use to you anymore, to your kids anymore. And I pointed out to him, I said, Dad, we have to see all this. We're all heading here, you know, so you have a great opportunity and we have a great opportunity to go through it together, do the best we can, and see where it goes. Um, and I felt good about that conversation with him. I wouldn't say that it turned the corner where he obviously, it really took another fall for him to realize that, okay, you know, I need home health. And we had a big summit meeting that's also depicted in the film where, you know, you have to lay all that stuff out and you have to be empathetic, but you have to be truthful.
Right.
So it's this progression, you know, and, you know, obviously I don't want to, you know, act the whole film out for you here, but I hope that people will get the idea that in A Soldier's Passage that um, there's something about your life, either your personal life or the life of your family or any loved ones. You know, we're all getting to the age where we're losing friends. I've had
Hmm.
more than I care to talk about in recent years.
Right.
COVID only amplified all of that. Obviously, this was
Hmm.
all shot pre-COVID, and
Right.
it oddly, Stephanie, to watch the family have access to someone who's not dying of COVID, but is, you know, going through this end of life, basically dying of old age, essentially. But and to be together and to be able to touch and to be able to have these conversations, I can't imagine, even if my dad had gone through this in the age of COVID when I couldn't go to the retirement home. Oh my God, you know,
Hmm.
I'd be making a very different movie, or there'd be seemingly nothing to make the movie about, hardly.
Hmm.
And so I'm grateful for that. Um, but hopefully we're moving out of that so that these opportunities, you know, I'm just hopeful that we'll see a day where we won't be hearing so much about COVID deaths. But in any case, I'm hoping that families will be able to walk with their elders and their friends of any age through these steps and find some real help, support, companionship, and hard tips
Hmm.
in this film.
I think that opening the conversation, because if you, I don't
Mhm.
want to call it a taboo conversation, but you know, it's one of those conversations people don't want to talk about. They don't want to face, you know, a family member in that time. And in a lot of cases, I can say during my father's last days, you know, I was there and I told, you know, I didn't want him to hang on because I knew it was almost done. And I wanted to assure him that he could go and he didn't have to worry. I had everything taken care of. And I was having that conversation with him, and a nurse had heard me. And she said, do you know down the hall, every one of those rooms, people are begging that person not to go, which makes it even harder on the family. And then the person who, you know, is ready to pass hangs on, you know, their force is hanging on because they want to comfort the family. So I think, you know, another reason why I was drawn to this is because it is important. It is part of, I don't want to be cheesy and do the circle of life thing, but it is part of life. It is not the pleasant part, but it is something that we can celebrate that they had all of this time. We had all of this time with them. And with your film, you're celebrating that life with conversation and talking and having and bringing that warmth to the person and to um more memories for your heart, I think, that you carry on after they leave. So it's a comfort for you, as well. In looking at this type of narrative approach to a story about your life, about another person's life, and especially when we think of our parents, uh, we we look up to them. For most of us, we look up to them. We want to honor them, and then if they've served in the military, we want to make sure we honor that, because that's in their mind. I know with my father, he was the warrior and he was the strong one. He took care of all the things. And in fact, when I went to um, take care of him in his last days, he had everything worked out. He had, all I had to do is just follow the instructions, basically,
Yeah.
because like your dad, he was self-sufficient. He wanted, but the other, there's other sad parts of that where by the time when my father called me and gave me the bad news, and I got there 2 days later, he was sitting with an ice chest, yogurt, and Coke next to him that a neighbor brought because he couldn't get up anymore, you know, and it broke my heart because he didn't tell me that. But, again, these are conversations and these are things that have to evolve with that relationship and where they are. So, you were involved, I think, with the last 9 months of your father's days in this story that you're telling. And, I basically had a week
Hmm.
because my
Yeah.
father was that stubborn,
Yeah.
and I was talking to him every week. So he never told me that. So it's, and he had lived with my son and I for a while. And then the weather in New England, where we were living at the time, was too much for him. So he went to Las Vegas, Nevada, where the heat was better for his arthritis. So in that year that he left us, you know, it changed a lot of
Hmm.
things. But
Yeah.
this is a very brave film, and it's a very um, important one that we need to have these conversations, not only about death, but about embracing and accepting what's going on, and understanding and being more involved and helping the journey be less I don't want to say less emotional, but less frustrating, right? Because you're part of that, helping part of that.
Right. Yeah. And I would just say, as opposed to make it less of anything, is to make it more profound and more essential, because the opportunity is there. And I don't want to kind of preach urgency and saying, okay, now you've got to get this person talking about all the stories that they didn't tell you, and you've got to, unload all of the emotional baggage that you've left unattended for 60 years. There's a balance in all
Mhm,
that. Um, but I do think that the film carefully presents an idea for that balance,
mhm.
where you get a little bit of everything and you open the door and you ask questions. Uh, you don't drill down and you don't say certainly, like, you're going to be gone in 6 months. Somebody better tell me this. There's some families that might
Right.
approach it that way, actually, but
Right.
but so the invitation should be there to try to do that. I mean,
Mhm,
I think also, we tend to do that only when the patient is terminal sometimes. And obviously, if we were a little bit more alert to the fact that, we don't know when this is going to happen for any of
right.
us, but, obviously, if folks are getting in their 80s and 90s, you don't want to put off the opportunity to sit and talk and reminisce with them a little bit
Sure.
and find out, because, once my dad left, I'm sure you've experienced it too, is that how many times has something come up and said, well, dad would know that or mom would know
Right.
that, but
Right.
nobody else knows that,
Mhm,
so
mhm.
so
Yeah.
again, not to make it sound too urgent, but I think there are sweet opportunities there. It takes teamwork.
Mhm.
It's hard to get families together on that, and this is depicted in the film. I mean, my brother and sister and I, we're all in three different parts of the country. We all voted for different presidents in one election. It's so trying to come together on stuff like that is challenging. We did okay
Mhm.
with it, um, but so there's that terrain that is covered also in the film too.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, I think
and
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, no,
Oh.
I wasn't able to finish that sentence
Oh,
anyway.
all
So
right. That's the other part of this is having a third party who's objective. That's your
right.
therapist.
Hmm.
That's a person that if you're frustrated with family members, you don't have to take it out on them because you don't understand their emotions about that situation. So if you talk to your therapist, they can help
Yeah,
bring that around so you're staying on the path of trying to keep everyone together and moving
sure.
forward.
And a good
So,
therapist, if you've been with them for a while, knows those dynamics, because
mhm,
part of what I talk about is, the nuclear family.
sure.
Uh, and just as a sub thought about therapy is, yes, it does take some time experimentation to find a good therapist.
Mhm.
But I would just submit that it's worth the search. I've told people who I've recommended it to or have come to me for ideas, I say, make it like dating a little bit. It's like, have a date with this person, just like if you want to have a second date, there's something clicking there. But if
Right.
not, big deal. And that if you're going to enter online dating, for example, it's going to take 3, 4, 5, or 6.
100.
Making an adventure that you
Right.
understand without
Right.
saying, I tried that, I couldn't find anybody,
Yeah.
it's a pain in the ass. And
Right.
oh, please give it a second chance. But you're right. So anyway, the therapist, can certainly be that safe space,
Mhm.
to run it by. And also it takes a village.
Right.
And so uh, I tried to represent that in the film too, because there was a wonderful chaplain who was on site there. And actually, the scene that I have with the chaplain coming into the room quite accidentally and talking, being a radio guy, oftentimes when my dad would start reminiscing, I would turn my recorder on and just sort of lay it on the bed. He never knew it. And I had the recorder going on through most of that, what is depicted in that scene, where he's actually saying, you know, uh, that he's come to terms with the idea of passing. And the chaplain walks in to borrow his book that he's written. I should mention something about that, is that the title of Soldier's Passage is the name of a book my dad wrote
Mhm.
about his World War II experiences.
Oh, okay.
And, and it makes an appearance in the film. It's sort of a brief one, but there's uh, uh, a scene where I reference the book and he reads something from the book, and it's kind of the anchor to his military experience and what it taught to him in life. But anyway, the chaplain was coming in in real life to borrow the book. He wanted to read it, and then we were right in the middle of this, like, what's the purpose of life, or what's going on right now conversation. And I said, could you please sit down for a minute? And he was not prepped for it, other than the fact that he works at a retirement home and he has these conversations all the time. And again, not to reveal all the essence of every scene, but I will in this case, just because I know that some people who see this will never see the film. I hope that that's not the case, but I know it's to be true. But anyway, essentially, he convinces my dad that every breath he takes is part of his story.
Mhm.
And that even though he's bedbound, that every time somebody walks in, there's a human interaction opportunity. And my dad was capable of doing that in a positive way. I mean, that was his nature anyway. But he kind of talked him out of feeling too sorry for himself, that he couldn't be curious and kind to the healthcare worker,
Mhm.
or even to just the nurse that he knew on the floor and was just bringing his pills. And so that, I think all that helps, but all the messaging can't come from the kid in this example, or
Right.
the son or the daughter. You have to enlist other people and look for people that you can enlist, people, friends, that my dad had. Some were more comfort than others, get them together with those people.
Mhm.
And one scene that I dearly love because, we might get emotional talking about it, because it features an acting friend of mine and a sweet, sweet man who passed away himself suddenly a year or two ago. His name's Pat Brennan. Um, in real life, I had an army buddy of my dad who I'd sent a copy of his book to, who was just effusive about saying, can I talk to your dad? I just really want to thank him. And so I made that happen. And as it's shown in the film, is almost exactly as it happened, because the guy talked so loud I could hear everything, as elderly folks need to do sometimes.
Hmm.
And so, there was an opportunity there to connect my dad with his military experience from his 20s, where somebody still today could say to him, you were an enlisted man's officer and you were really fabulous. And the guy wasn't, really, um, I don't want to use, all I can come up with is articulate, but he wasn't extremely verbal, but he got those key things out, and
Sure.
it was a very powerful thing. So I think you can look for those opportunities. Where can the other messages come from to
Hmm.
remind your elder that they are cared about, that they had an impact on people's lives. I don't think you need to do a Ralph Edwards, "This Is Your Life" taping in the room, but I think in
Right.
bits and pieces you can, make that happen.
Sure. No, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Well, we don't want to give out any more information about this
Okay.
film, but we want to talk about the generosity that you have shown to the community and to the Guild Theater here in Albuquerque,
Yeah.
because you have graciously put your film available for viewing for a rental of $4 for a week or $8 for purchase of a digital copy. And half of that money goes to the Guild Theater to help support them during the pandemic turn down because they don't have people coming into the theater
Right.
um, at this
Yeah,
time.
thank you. The Guild is a treasure for Albuquerque. You haven't been in Albuquerque that long, I know,
I
but
haven't, no.
every place in the USA just about has that little independent theater, or they call it an art house theater.
Mhm.
The one place that will bring in those foreign films when they're new, so you don't have to wait 2 years to see them. Play those quirky titles, and or just sometimes it's just the independent film that by Oscar time is suddenly it got everybody talking, but when it first comes out, nobody's talking about it yet. So Keith Henley and his team at the Guild are going through the same kind of trouble that any performance space or film house is going through, which is, over a year ago, they had to shut down. And fortunately, the film industry has come together in part because filmmakers and distributors need to get films out.
Mhm.
They've teamed up with some of these smaller theaters to help them get some income, much like you described. This wasn't a new idea or a singular idea from me.
Mhm.
Uh, the Guild has been getting shared income from rentals of all their titles for the better part of a year. So, and when I discovered this, I said, this is great. So instead of us going to Netflix, we went to the Guild um, to make sure that at least once every couple of weeks we were looking at, and at first they only had like 5 or 6, but now they got 15 or 20 titles, and they're
Mhm.
cycling through with some great stuff, documentaries, all kinds of foreign films, if you love that genre, quirky comedies. And I noticed that there was one local film, or he was making space for a short film that was local. And I don't think that they were trying to make money. I think it was a
Mm.
free look.
Mhm.
Uh, but anyway, a Soldier's Passage had gone through its festival circuit. We did pretty well. We won like a bunch of awards in maybe 12 or 13 festivals we got
Mhm.
selected into, which was nice. But it was time to, put it out there.
Right.
Um, I am, it's impossible for me to put a film out and expect to make back what I spent on making that. So what I make on the film means pretty little to me at this point. And so I just talked to Keith and I said, could we do that? We had screened it, had a private screening, and we're talking about screening it this Father's Day again, in the theater. But at this point, it's a toss up whether or not within a couple months they'll be able to, put people in that theater.
Right.
So anyway, so I said, can we put it up, and through Father's Day we'll split the income. It's we're off to a slow start. Honestly, we're under $100 in income, which means the most I'm giving to the guild right now is 50. It's been up there 3 weeks or so, but I also know it's Oscar time. There's
Mhm.
so many options out there. There's, Kong versus Godzilla, God knows. So I appreciate the opportunity to get the word out, because in some ways it's just that small local film. I
Right.
think for a local film with local talent and a tiny crew, I mean, it was me, Tim Nenninger, and Jen McKinley as a production assistant and script supervisor. We did all of that, and I'm I'm not saying it's going to match stand up with Nomadland or Minari or anything else that you have a chance to see, but I think from a practical standpoint, as we've been talking, it's a really good one to take in.
Hmm. No,
And to be,
oh, yeah.
well, and just to be able to do it for $4 or $8 and help the theater,
Mhm.
I think is a good place to be.
Right. Well, that's another reason why we loved it. It's not just because the story is powerful and it's something that it doesn't matter who you are, what age you are. It is part of our life, our the fabric of living, and how we are, you know, how our grace allows us to move through it and bring other people along with us and help keep our family together and support while honoring the passage of our loved ones. But so you have the story, the powerful story, but also the powerful story of support of the community at large. And, filmmakers giving back is always a wonderful thing to see, because a lot of times I think people don't understand um, where they can find content that's good. They're not looking for things, or they're not seeing the stories, or maybe they saw the story and didn't really hit them, why it's important. I know I've seen a lot of fundraising, watch our film and half of it goes to this, but a lot of times you're paying $30, $40 also to do that, to watch that, or to participate in that. um, this is a very small amount of money, $4, to rent a film. And I don't want to say just pay the money so the donation can go. That's not this. It is a story that's important. You should, and honor Paul and his hard work, and with all of the people that were involved in this project, and show that support and tell people about it. It's the
Mhm.
other thing, because this is available through Father's Day, June 30th, correct? That's your end date?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the date we picked just to find out, whether or not we'd be back in the theater.
Right, right.
Y-
And
you
things
know,
are
uh,
right. Things are starting to open up. And so, a lot of people are still home and a lot of people haven't gotten their vaccination. So I think it's a good film to start to watch at home, because the other thing is a lot of people haven't ever purchased a film to watch at home, so this is a new experience also for people viewing what um, we got going on here as well. So we'd like to um, make sure that we get the word out. We want people to know this is on Vimeo, which is like YouTube, but is a little bit different. And we'll provide links in our article and also with this video if you're watching. So you can go directly to the film, because you can just pay online. Like you say, it's $4 or $8 are your options. And half of that money does go to support local, the Guild Theater, as well as the filmmaker, because it's part of the distribution. When you make a film, you're putting it out there for people to watch.
Right.
And
And that
like anything else.
and that's the joy. I mean, if you've ever been to a film festival, the indie filmmakers get up on stage and they say, we're it's all about getting an audience.
Right.
And so, it's not, I'm not going to make that money back. It's just something to do, and to get a little small change and just share that.
Hmm.
And I do want to say, I think the market research on this, I think, such as it is that I think people hear about, okay, it's a soldier's passage, a story about an old man dying. Who needs that? I need some happy news. I think from the practical aspect of what you can, get from the film, and also there's humor in it. I mean, I was really careful to, drop some scenes that actually happened with characters that were trying to do their best, but uh, we might have missed the mark a little bit. And the conversations that I had with my dad, surprised me, and some of them were humorous too. So it's not, I think it's an uplifting film, honestly, by the time you finish it. And I do want to mention that I did hear back from several people in the healthcare industry who watched this film and really said nice things about how accurate it sounded, how realistic it seemed, how it honored, the work of hospice workers, home healthcare workers. It's a large cast, 40 speaking roles, I think, for local
Wow.
actors. And then another, it's kind of sweet because we shot it at the retirement community La Vida here in Albuquerque, and there were another 50 residents who signed up, to be extras, hanging out in the
Nice.
lobby, different scenes and walking
Right.
down the hallways and things like that. So it is a community effort. I mean, there's like,
Mhm.
100 people contributed to this, and now it's time to, just to sort of see if we can expand the impact of it, both for yourself as a viewer, but for our local independent theater. Guildcinema.com is the
Got
place
it.
to go.
Yep.
Guildcinema.com, and if you scroll down, you'll find the picture of a soldier's passage, and you can click on it there. It's probably easier to remember than the Vimeo uh, link. But so
Right.
Stephanie, thank you so much for talking with me about it, and I
You're
really
very welcome.
honor what your uh, uh, news organization and your network is really trying to do, and all the support that you're trying to give to local cinema people here and filmmakers, not just here but throughout your career. So it's good work, and I am really pleased to have been able to make your acquaintance too.
Well, I believe me, this is just a start. We're here and we're gonna once everything really opens up or we're vaccinated enough to see each other in person, we will be meeting up soon enough. But I appreciate your time and again your outreach
Mhm.
about your
We're we're
film.
we're 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 on Facebook too. So if you put a soldier's passage in Facebook, we have a page there, and obviously we're putting the link to Vimeo up, about once a week. I'm also loading up scenes from the film if you'd like to,
Okay.
get a little bit of an extra peek at it. So that's
Sure. We'll
obviously
have
for
all of
Facebook.
that. Absolutely. That's
Okay.
wonderful. We'll have all of that in our shared article and videos. And you can find us all over the internet. And are you using the hashtag a soldier's passage? So if people look for that.
Um, I
Well, we will. We'll start
I'm on
it.
Facebook. I'm not active on Twitter.
Oh, that's
Um,
fine. People can use that hashtag to find it also
is
on
that
a
how it
search in
on
Facebook. Yep.
Facebook? Okay, good. Then
Yeah,
then look
hashtags are
for us
all
that way.
over.
All right.
Okay. So great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. And we hope our audience will visit, watch, at least watch the trailer, tell folks about it. If you're not, it's not something that you'll watch, but you want to make a kind donation, that would be appreciated. And then, you know what, buy a copy and share it with someone that will watch it,
Mm.
share it with a family member or friend. So
I'm
it's all
sure
about.
everybody who's watching this, if they're not in that situation now with their family, they know someone who is,
Mhm.
or a healthcare worker who's had a really tough year that wouldn't mind seeing a good depiction of their work. So, there are, I think, a lot of reasons to check it out. So I hope you will.
We know they will. Okay. Thank you so much again, Paul. We'll see you next time.